The afternoon sun streamed through the tall windows of the private residence, casting long golden rectangles across the polished wood floor. It was one of those deceptively quiet afternoons at the palace, the kind that often preceded a storm. The Prince of Wales, William, was kneeling on a rug, deeply engrossed in a world of colorful plastic bricks with his youngest son, Prince Louis. The 4-year-old's brow was furrowed in concentration as he attempted to balance a precarious tower, his small tongue poking out from the corner of his mouth in a gesture of pure focus that was so uniquely his. The scene was one of genuine, unguarded domesticity, a rare moment of peace away from the relentless demands of royal engagements and public scrutiny. Nearby, Queen Camilla sat in a plush armchair by the window, a cup of Earl Grey growing cold on the side table beside her. In her hand, she held her mobile phone, her thumb occasionally scrolling across the screen. To any observer, it would have appeared as the benign act of a woman checking emails, or perhaps looking at the day's news. But there was a tightness around her eyes, a slight stiffness in her posture that seemed out of place in the otherwise relaxed setting. Her attention appeared divided, her gaze flickering from the screen to the scene on the rug, then back again. William, though appearing absorbed in play, possessed an innate awareness of his surroundings, a sixth sense honed from a lifetime of being watched. He felt the weight of her gaze, the subtle shift of her focus. It wasn't the fond glance of a grandmother. It felt more analytical, more detached. He glanced up, and for a fleeting second, his eyes met hers. A small, tight smile touched Camilla's lips, but her eyes darted away, back to her phone. William felt a prickle of unease, a feeling he quickly dismissed, chalking it up to his own perpetual wariness. While he turned his attention back to Louis, who was now crowing with delight as his tower stood firm. "What do you think, William? A lovely day for a family photograph, isn't it?" Camilla's voice cut through the quiet, light, and seemingly casual. William looked up again, his expression neutral. "I suppose so, Camilla, though Louis is usually more interested in demolition than documentation." He smiled down at his son, who had indeed just knocked over his own tower with a joyful shriek. Camilla laughed, a practiced, polished sound. "Oh, but these are the moments to capture, the candid ones." As she spoke, she subtly adjusted her grip on her phone, angling it slightly. William noticed the movement. It was the same unconscious shift he'd seen 1,000 times in public the moment a photographer found their shot. The prickle of unease returned, sharper this time. He refocused on Louis, helping him gather the scattered bricks, but his peripheral vision remained locked on his stepmother. He saw her raise the phone a little higher, her thumb hovering over the screen. The device was no longer a passive object in her hand. It had become a tool, its dark, unblinking lens pointed directly at them. The afternoon light, once warm and inviting, now felt like a harsh spotlight exposing a private moment to an unseen audience. William's mind raced. What was she doing? This was a private family space, not a photo call. And the children, especially, were supposed to be off-limits, their images protected from the very media frenzy that Camilla herself had navigated for decades. She knew the rules, the unspoken boundaries that were supposed to protect the fragile normalcy of their lives. A cold, hard knot formed in his stomach. This wasn't about capturing a memory. This was about capturing content. The history between them, a long and complicated tapestry woven with threads of resentment, duty, and forced tolerance, suddenly felt frayed and precarious. This was a line, and she was not just towing it, she was preparing to step right over it. The air in the room thickened. The only sounds were Louis's happy babbling and the faint, almost imperceptible hum of the palace beyond the door. William kept his head down, watching his son, but every fiber of his being was now focused on the woman by the window and the phone in her hand, poised to steal a moment that was not hers to take. And the stage was set for a confrontation that had been years in the making. The moment shattered like glass. It wasn't a loud crack, but the sharp, sudden shift in energy that precedes an explosion. A palace protection officer, a man whose eyes missed nothing, materialized near the doorway. He didn't enter the room, but his posture was rigid, his gaze locked not on a potential external threat, but on the queen consort herself. He had seen it. The raised phone. The focus on the young prince. His training dictated a single, non-negotiable priority: the security and privacy of the principals, especially the little ones. Across the room, William saw the officer's look. It was all the confirmation he needed. In one fluid motion, he rose from the rug, his movement so swift and silent that it startled Louis, who looked up with wide, questioning eyes. William's face, which moments before had been open and playful, was now a mask of cold, controlled fury. He didn't speak. And he didn't need to. He crossed the space between them in 4 long, ground-eating strides. Camilla looked up, her expression flickering from surprise to something else, a flash of guilt, quickly masked by a veneer of aristocratic composure. "William, I was just—" She didn't finish. William's hand shot out, not violently, but with an unmistakable finality. His fingers closed around her phone, his grip firm and unyielding. For a suspended second, and they were locked in a silent tableau. The future king, his jaw clenched with a rage that ran deeper than this single moment, and his stepmother, her carefully constructed world of polite fiction, collapsing around her. He pulled the phone from her grasp. It was a silent declaration. "This ends now." He looked at the screen. The last image captured was a slightly blurred but perfectly identifiable shot of Louis, his face alight with childish joy, the pile of colorful bricks before him. It was a picture that had no place in anyone's camera roll but his parents'. William's knuckles whitened around the device. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was a breach of trust so profound it cut to the very heart of their dysfunctional family dynamic. He thought of his mother, Diana, and the relentless, predatory lens that had hounded her every step, a lens that had often been fed and facilitated by those within the palace walls. And now, here it was again, and in the hands of the woman at the center of it all. "William, please, you're overreacting," Camilla said, her voice a low, controlled hiss, her eyes darting towards the door, acutely aware of the watching officer and the potential for this scene to leak. "I was just taking a picture for Charles. He loves seeing the children happy." The excuse was flimsy, a tissue paper thin lie. William didn't even dignify it with a response. His gaze was ice. He looked from the phone in his hand to the woman before him, and in that look was the accumulated weight of decades. The boy who had walked behind his mother's coffin, who had seen his family torn apart by affairs and media circuses, who had been forced to accept this woman as a permanent fixture in his father's life. He had tolerated her, been polite for the sake of the crown and for his father's happiness. But tolerance has its limits, and for William, the boundary was, and always would be, the safety and innocence of his children. The line had been crossed, and the fragile peace they had maintained was now in ashes at their feet. The silence in the room after William took the phone was more powerful than any shout. It was a heavy, suffocating blanket. Camilla sat frozen, her hands now empty in her lap, her face pale beneath her carefully applied makeup. She looked smaller suddenly, the regal poise stripped away to reveal something more vulnerable and perhaps more calculating. William stood over her, a towering figure of silent accusation, the confiscated phone a physical embodiment of the broken trust between them. Louis, oblivious to the drama, had toddled over to his nanny who had appeared silently in another doorway, scooping him up and whisking him away from the charged atmosphere. The room now held only William, Camilla, and the weight of their shared, difficult history. William finally broke the silence, his voice low and trembling with a fury he was barely containing. "Explain this to me, Camilla. Explain why my son's private moment is on your phone." He held up the device, the screen still glowing with the incriminating image. Camilla straightened her back, attempting to reclaim some dignity. "I have explained. Your father—" she began, but William cut her off with a sharp, dismissive gesture. "Do not bring my father into this. He would be as horrified as I am. You know the rules. Everyone in this family knows the rules. Our children are not content. They are not a photo op for your— What? Your personal collection? Your private messages?" The insinuation hung in the air, ugly and unavoidable. The decades-old accusations of Camilla manipulating the press, of stories being leaked to paint her in a better light, suddenly felt not like ancient history, but a present and pressing threat. Camilla's eyes flashed with a defensive anger. How dare you imply? I have done nothing but support this family. I have put up with the suspicion, the hatred, the comparisons to—" She stopped herself, but the name was already a ghost in the room. Diana. William's expression didn't change, but a muscle feathered in his jaw. "You have been tolerated," he said, his words deliberate and cutting. "For my father's sake, you have been given a place, a title, a life that was never meant to be yours. And this," he shook the phone, "is how you repay that tolerance? By treating my family, my son, as a tool?" The words were brutal in their honesty, stripping away years of carefully constructed public relations. This wasn't the diplomat, the future monarch. This was a son, a father, and a man who had watched his mother be devoured by the very forces this woman had once been so intimately entangled with. For Camilla, it was the ultimate humiliation. The boy who had once been a teenager she was terrified of meeting, and the man who she had reportedly tried to prevent from marrying Kate because she wasn't aristocratic enough, was now standing before her as an immovable force, passing judgment. "What happens now?" Camilla asked, her voice quieter now, the fight draining out of her as the reality of the situation set in. A family row was one thing. A security incident involving a senior royal and a member of the Royal Protection Command was quite another. There would be reports, there would be protocols, and there would be questions. William looked at her, his expression unreadable. He looked down at the phone in his hand, then back at her. "Now," he echoed, his voice flat. "Now, we wait for my father." He didn't need to say more. The battle lines were drawn, and the war, long simmering beneath the surface of royal protocol, had just been openly declared. The phone, and the question of what she intended to do with that photo, was no longer just a family matter, and it was a potential crisis for the monarchy itself. The summons to the king's private study came within the hour. The atmosphere in the palace had shifted. Servants moved with an even quieter purpose, their eyes downcast, acutely aware that a seismic event had occurred in the usually placid afternoon. William arrived first, his face a stoic mask, the confiscated phone held in his hand like a piece of evidence. He stood by the window, looking out at the formal gardens, like seeing nothing but the replay of the afternoon's events in his mind. When the door opened, King Charles III entered, his expression weary. The weight of the crown, the cancer diagnosis he was battling, and now this fractious dispute between his wife and his son seemed to press down on his shoulders. Behind him, looking pale and drawn but with a residue of defiance in her eyes, came Camilla. She moved to a chair, not looking at William. The king took his place behind the large mahogany desk, a traditional seat of power and judgment. He gestured for William to sit, but William remained standing. "William," the king began, his voice gentle but firm, Your stepmother has told me her version of events. I would like to hear yours. William's gaze flickered to Camilla, then back to his father. With respect, Papa, there is no version of events. It is a matter of fact. A security officer observed Queen Camilla using her mobile phone to photograph Prince Louis in a private family setting. I approached her, and I took the phone to prevent any further recording. The image is still on the device. He placed the phone on the king's desk, the soft thud echoing in the tense room. Charles looked at the phone, then at his wife. There was a deep sadness in his eyes, the pain of a man caught between two people he loved in vastly different ways. Camilla, my love. Why? He asked, his voice heavy. Camilla leaned forward, her hands clasped tightly. Charles, it was nothing. A moment of foolishness, perhaps. I saw Louis looking so adorable, so like you did as a child, and I just wanted to capture it. I thought you would like to see it. I wasn't thinking clearly. I forgot for 1 second the rules. Her explanation was smoother now, more practiced, an appeal to her husband's sentimentality. William let out a short, humorless breath. She was not forgetting. She has spent a lifetime understanding the power of an image. She knows exactly what she was doing. He turned to his father, his eyes pleading for understanding. This isn't just about a photograph. It's about trust. It's about the safety of my children in their own home. We have Harry and Meghan hounded across the globe, and we see where that leads. We have a duty to protect the innocent, and that duty was betrayed today. He referenced the ongoing security concerns that plagued his brother, a constant, painful reminder of what happened when privacy was breached. The mention of Harry was a low blow, and everyone in the room felt it. It brought the family's deepest wound to the surface. Camilla's face tightened. Charles ran a hand over his face. The king looked at the two most important people in his life, separated by a chasm of history and mistrust. Then he knew William was right about the protocols, but he also knew the pain it would cause his wife to be publicly condemned by his son. "What do you want, William?" Charles asked, his voice tired. "What would you have me do?" William finally sat down, leaning forward, his elbows on his knees. He looked directly at his stepmother. "I want her to understand, not just to apologize, but to truly understand the line that was crossed. And I want assurances, concrete assurances, that it will never, ever happen again. The privacy of my family, of my children, is not negotiable." He looked back at his father. "And I want the photo deleted. Now. In front of us." It was a test, a demand for accountability. Charles looked at Camilla, his expression one of gentle but firm expectation. After a long, painful silence, Camilla nodded, a single, almost imperceptible movement. She reached out, picked up the phone, unlocked it with trembling fingers, navigated to the photo of Louis, and held the screen up for William to see. Then, with a deliberate press of her finger, she deleted it. She placed the phone back on the desk. The image was gone. But the damage, the fissure it had opened in the family's fragile peace, remained as deep and permanent as a scar. The public, of course, saw none of this. The carefully calibrated machine of the monarchy spun on, presenting a united front to the world. A few days later, the family gathered for a scheduled engagement, as the official opening of a new community garden. To the assembled press and public, it was a picture of royal harmony. King Charles, looking regal in a morning coat, stood between his wife and his eldest son. Camilla smiled warmly at William as he spoke to a veteran. William was seen to place a gentle, guiding hand on her back as they walked towards a waiting dignitary. The newspapers lapped it up. "A united front," one headline proclaimed. "Charles's family stepping up," read another. But those who knew how to look could see the truth beneath the surface. William's smiles didn't quite reach his eyes. His politeness was immaculate, but it was the politeness one extends to a distant acquaintance, not a family member. Camilla, for her part, seemed more subdued, her usual effusive charm dialed back several notches. The body language was all wrong. The space between them was just a fraction too wide, the eye contact just a second too brief to be truly comfortable. The incident with the phone had become an unspoken but ever-present factor in the palace dynamics. For William, the moment had been a catalyst. The polite tolerance he had extended to Camilla for years had evaporated, replaced by a cold, protective vigilance. He saw her now not just as his father's wife, but as a potential threat to the bubble of normalcy he and Kate were desperately trying to create for their children. Conversations with his father about the incident were brief and unsatisfactory. Charles, ever the peacemaker, wanted to move on, to smooth things over for the sake of the crown. But William couldn't move on. He saw it as yet another example of the old guard, the establishment, prioritizing image over substance, protecting the institution at the potential expense of the individuals within it. The tension rippled outwards. Rumors began to surface in the press, planted by unseen hands, or about a growing rift. Stories appeared about William's alleged plot to reshape the monarchy when he became king, whispers that he would streamline the institution and that Camilla's role might be diminished. Palace aides were quick to dismiss such stories as baseless speculation, but they had the unmistakable whiff of a briefing war. Was someone on William's side trying to set expectations? Was someone close to Camilla trying to paint her as a victim? The truth was lost in the fog of anonymous sources. In private, the atmosphere at family gatherings was glacial. Kate, ever the diplomat, tried to act as a bridge, engaging Camilla in polite conversation about the children or garden design. Her efforts were valiant, and Camilla responded in kind, but the warmth was manufactured. The easy, if forced, camaraderie they had developed in recent years was gone. William remained distant, and his conversations with his stepmother limited to the bare minimum required by politeness. He threw himself into his work, his charitable endeavors, and most importantly, his time with his children, where he could be the father he wished to be, away from the complicated web of royal life. For Camilla, the fallout was a stark reminder of her precarious position. She was the queen consort, but she was not the mother of the future king. Her influence was derived entirely from her husband, and her husband was ill. The incident had exposed the fragility of her acceptance within the family's inner circle. The old resentments, the whispers of the other woman, had been reignited. She felt William's coldness like a physical force, a constant unspoken judgment. It drove her closer to Charles, her only true ally, but it also made her more defensive, more determined to protect her own position and legacy. The united front presented to the world was a masterpiece of royal performance. But behind the gilded walls, the family was more fractured than ever. The deleted photograph was gone, but its ghost lingered in every room, a constant reminder of a single devastating afternoon when the fragile peace had been irrevocably shattered, leaving the future of the monarchy's family dynamic hanging in a precarious and uncertain balance.